Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creep Smith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Last year, I spent 6 months participating in what I was told was a psychological experiment. I found an ad in my local paper looking for imaginative people looking to make good money. And since it was the only ad that week that I was remotely qualified for, I gave them a call and we arranged an interview. They told me that all I'd have to do is stay in a room, alone, with sensors attached to my head to read my brain activity, and while I was there I would visualize myself having a double. They called it my tulpa. It seemed easy enough, and I agreed to do it as soon as they told me how much I'd be paid. The next day, I began. They brought me to a simple room and gave me a bed, then attached the sensors to me and hooked them into a little black box on the table beside me. They talked me through the process of visualizing my double again and explained that if I got bored or restless, instead of moving around, I should visualize my double moving around, or try to interact with him, that sort of thing. The idea was to keep him with me the entire time I was in the room. I had some trouble with it for the first few days. It was more controlled than any sort of daydreaming that I had done before. I'd imagine my double for a few minutes and then grow distracted, but by the fourth day I could manage to keep him present for the entire 6 hours. They told me that I was doing very well. The second week they gave me a different room with wall-mounted speakers. They told me that they wanted to see if I could still keep the tulpa with me in spite of distracting stimuli. The music was discordant, ugly, and unsettling, and it made the process a little more difficult, but I managed nonetheless. The next week they played even more unsettling music, punctuated with shrieks, feedback loops, and what sounded like an old-school modem dialing up. It also had guttural voices speaking some kind of foreign language. Yeah, I just laughed that off. I was a pro by then. After about a month, I started to get bored. To liven things up, I started interacting with my doppelganger. We'd have conversations or play rock, paper, scissors, or I'd imagine him juggling, breakdancing, whatever caught my fancy. I asked the researchers if my foolishness would adversely affect their study, but they encouraged me. So we played, we communicated, and that was fun for a while. Then it started to get a little strange. I was telling him about my first date one day, and he corrected me. I'd said that my date was wearing a yellow top, and he told me that it was a green one. I thought about it for a second, and I realized he was right. It creeped me out, and after my shift that day, I talked to the researchers about it. "You're using the thought form to access your subconscious," they explained. "You knew on some level that you were wrong, and you subconsciously corrected yourself." What had been creepy was suddenly cool. I was talking to my subconscious. It took some practice, but I found that I could question my tulpa and access all sorts of memories. I could make it quote whole pages of books that I'd only read once years before, or cite things that I was taught and immediately forgot in high school. It was awesome. That was around the time I started calling up my double outside of the research center. Not often at first, but I was so used to imagining him by now that it was almost odd not to see him. So whenever I was bored, I'd visualize him. Eventually, I started doing it almost all the time. It was amusing to take him along like an invisible friend. I imagined him when I was hanging out with friends or visiting my mom. I even brought him along on a date once. I didn't need to speak aloud to him, so I was able to carry out entire conversations with him, and no one was the wiser. Now, I know it sounds strange, but it was fun. Not only was he a walking repository of everything that I knew and everything that I'd forgotten, he also seemed more in touch with me than I did at times. He had an uncanny grasp of the minutiae of body language that I didn't even realize I was picking up on. For example, I thought the date that I had brought him along on was going badly, but he pointed out how she was laughing just a little too hard at my jokes and leaning towards me as I spoke, and a bunch of subtle clues that I didn't know I was consciously picking up on. I listened and, well, let's just say that that date went very well. By the time that I'd been at the research center for 4 months, he was with me constantly. The researchers approached me one day after my shift and asked me if I had stopped visualizing him. I denied it, and they seemed pleased. I silently asked my double if he knew what had prompted that, but he just shrugged it off, so did I. I withdrew a little from the world at that point. I was having some trouble relating to people. It seemed to me that they were so confused and unsure of themselves, while I had a manifestation of myself to confer with. It made socializing awkward. Nobody else seemed to be aware of the reasons behind their actions, why some things made them angry and others made them laugh. They didn't know what moved them, but I did, or at least I could ask myself and get an answer. A friend, confronted me one evening. He pounded at the door until I answered it and came in fuming and swearing up a storm. "You haven't answered when I called you in fucking weeks, you dick! What's your fucking problem?" Well, I was about to apologize to him, and I probably would have offered to hit the bars with him that night, but my tulpa suddenly grew furious. "Hit him," he said, and before I knew what I was doing, I had. I heard his nose break. He fell to the floor and then came up swinging, and we beat each other up and down my apartment. I was more furious than I'd ever been, and I was not merciful. I knocked him to the ground and gave him 2 savage kicks to the ribs, and that was when he fled, hunched over and sobbing. The police came by a few minutes later, but I told them that he had been the instigator, and since he wasn't around to refute me, they let me off with a warning. My tulpa was grinning the entire time. We spent the night crowing about my victory and sneering over how badly I had beaten my friend. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was checking out my black eye and cut lip in a mirror, that I remembered what had set me off. My double was the one who'd grown furious, not me. I'd been feeling guilty and a little ashamed, but he goaded me into a vicious fight with a concerned friend. He was present, of course, and he knew what I was thinking. You don't need him anymore. You don't need anyone else, he told me. And I started to feel my skin crawl. I explained all of this to the researchers who employed me, but they just laughed it off. "You can't be scared of something that you're imagining," one told me. My double stood beside him, nodded his head. Then he smirked at me. I tried to take their words to heart, but over the next few days I found myself growing more and more anxious around my tulpa. It seemed like he was changing. He looked taller, more menacing. His eyes were mischievous, and I saw malice in his constant smile. I decided that no job was worth losing my mind over. If he was out of control, I'd simply put him down. I was so used to him at that point that visualizing him was an automatic process, so I started trying my damnedest not to visualize him. It took a few days, but it started to work, somewhat. I could get rid of him for hours at a time, but every time that he'd come back, he seemed worse. His skin seemed ashen. His teeth were more pointed. He hissed and gibbered and threatened and swore. That discordant music that I'd been listening to for months, it seemed to accompany him everywhere. Even when I was at home, I'd relax and slip up, no longer concentrating on not seeing him. And there he'd be, with all that howling noise with him. At this point, I was still visiting the research center and spending my 6 hours a day there. I needed the money, and I thought that maybe they weren't aware that I was now actively not visualizing my tulpa. I was wrong. After my shift one day, about 5.5 months in, 2 impressively large men grabbed me and restrained me, and somebody in a lab coat jabbed a hypodermic needle into my body. I woke up from my stupor, Back in the room, strapped to the bed, music blaring, with my doppelganger standing over me and cackling. He hardly looked human anymore. His features were twisted. His eyes were sunken in their sockets and filmed over like a corpse. He was much taller than me, but hunched over. His hands were twisted and his fingernails were like talons. In short, he was fucking terrifying. I tried to will him away, but I just couldn't seem to concentrate. He giggled and tapped the IV on my arm. I thrashed in my restraints as best I could, but I could hardly move at all. They're pumping you full of the good shit, I think. How's the mind? All fuzzy. He leaned closer and closer with every word he spoke. I gagged. His breath smelled like spoiled meat. I tried to focus, but I simply couldn't banish him. The next few weeks were terrible. Every so often, someone in a doctor's coat would come and inject me with something or force feed me a pill. They kept me dizzy and unfocused. And sometimes they left me hallucinating or delusional. My thought form was still present, of course, constantly mocking me. He interacted with, or perhaps caused, my delusions. I hallucinated that my mother was there, scolding me, and then he cut her throat and blood showered me. It was so real I could taste it. The doctors never spoke to me. I begged at times. I screamed, hurled invectives, demanded answers. They never spoke to me. They may have talked to my tulpa, my personal monster. I'm not sure. I was so doped and confused that it might have just been more delusion, but I remember them talking with him. I grew convinced that he was the real one and I was the thought form. He, of course, encouraged that line of thought at times, mocked me at others. Another thing that I pray was a delusion. He could touch me. More than that, he could hurt me. He'd poke and prod at me as if he felt I wasn't paying enough attention to him. Once, he grabbed my testicles and squeezed until I told him I loved him. Another time, he slashed at my forearm with one of his talons. I still have a scar, and most days I can convince myself that I injured myself and just hallucinated that he was responsible. Most days. Then one day, while he was telling me a story about how he was going to gut everyone I loved, starting with my sister, he paused. This querulous look crossed his face, and he reached out and touched my head, like my mother used to when I was feverish. He stayed still for a long moment, and then he smiled. All thoughts are creative, he told me. Then he walked out the door. 3 hours later, I was given an injection and passed out. I awoke unrestrained. Shaking, I made my way to the door and I found it unlocked. I walked out into the empty hallway and I ran. I stumbled more than once, but I made it down the stairs and out into the lot behind the building. There I collapsed, weeping like a child. I knew I had to keep moving, but I couldn't manage it. I got home eventually. I don't remember how. I locked the door and shoved a dresser against it, and then I took a long shower. I slept for a day and a half. Nobody came for me in the night. Nobody came the next day or the one after that. It was over. I had spent a week locked in that room, but it had felt like a century. I'd withdrawn so much from my life beforehand that nobody even knew I was missing. The police didn't find anything. The research center was empty when they searched it. The paper trail fell apart, the names I'd given them were aliases, even the money I'd been paid was apparently untraceable. I recovered as much as one can. I don't leave the house much. I have panic attacks when I do. I cry a lot. I don't sleep much, and my nightmares are terrible. It's over, I tell myself. I survived. I use the concentration those bastards taught me to convince myself. And it works. Sometimes. Not today, though. Not today. 3 days ago, I got a phone call from my mother. There had been a tragedy. My sister, you see, she's the latest victim in a spree of killings, the police say. This perpetrator mugs his victims and then guts them. The funeral was this afternoon. It was as lovely a service as a funeral can be, I suppose. I was a little distracted, though. During the service, all I could hear was music coming from somewhere far away. Discordant, unsettling stuff that sounds like feedback and shrieking and a modem dialing up. I can still hear it. It's a little louder now. This game appears to originate on a Korean website some may recognize as the source of a particular comic that pops up every few months or so on sites like Reddit. Unfortunately, I don't speak Korean, so working off of the rough translation found here, I've tried to tease out a clearer version of the rules and instructions. It's unclear whether the other world to which the elevator delivers you is the shadow side referred to by Fableforge in his various games and rituals, or whether it's something else. Regardless as to what it may or may not be, however, as always, play at your own risk. Needed for the ritual, 1 principal player, and 1 building, at least 10 stories high, with an elevator. All 3 of these conditions must be met in order for the game to proceed. When venturing out, enter your chosen building and get into the elevator on the 1st floor alone. Do not proceed if anyone else is in the elevator with you. Press the button to the 4th floor. Then, in succession, the 2nd floor, the 6th floor, the 2nd floor, the 10th floor, and then the 5th floor. When arriving at the 5th floor, press the button for the 1st floor. If the elevator begins ascending to the 10th instead of descending to the 1st, you may proceed. If the elevator descends to the 1st floor, exit as soon as the doors open. Do not look back, and do not speak. If you reach the 10th floor, you may either choose to get off the elevator or stay on it. If you choose to get off, there is a woman that may have entered the elevator on the 5th floor. She will ask you, "Where are you going?" Do not answer her, and do not look at her. You will know whether you've arrived at the other world by 1 indication and 1 indication only. The only person present in it is you. The return trip. If you choose to stay on the elevator at the 10th floor, press the button for the 1st floor. If it doesn't work, keep pressing it until it finally does. When the elevator reaches the 1st floor, exit as soon as the doors open. Do not look back, do not speak. If you choose to exit the elevator at the 10th floor, you must use the same elevator to return as the one in which you arrived. When you enter the elevator, press the buttons in the same order you did in steps 2 through 8 of venturing out. You should finish again at the 5th floor. When you reach the 5th floor, press the button for the 1st floor. The elevator will again begin to ascend to the 10th floor. Press any other floor's button to cancel this ascension. You must press the button you used to cancel the ascension before you reach the 10th floor, however. After you've reached the first floor, check your surroundings carefully. If anything seems off, even the smallest detail, do not exit the elevator. If you detect something wrong, repeat step 2 until your surroundings look as they should. Once you're confident that you have returned to your own world, you may safely exit the elevator. Additional notes. Should you reach the other world, the floor onto which you will emerge will look almost identical to the one from your own world, save for 2 things. All the lights will be off, and the only thing that you'll be able to see from the windows is a red cross in the distance. Some say that electronic devices, mobile phones, cameras, MP3 players, etc. don't work in the other world. Others say they do. Getting back to your own world may be more difficult than it seems. You can become disoriented and forget which elevator you arrived in. The elevator may seem to be getting further and further from you as you walk towards it. That sort of thing. Be vigilant and keep your wits about you. If at any point during the ritual you faint, pass out, or otherwise lose consciousness, you will likely wake up in your own home. However, be sure to carefully examine your surroundings upon waking. The home to which you have been returned may not be the one you left when you first set out to attempt this ritual. Concerning the woman on the 5th floor, do not speak to her and do not look at her. The librarian is the term given to an entity which appears under a very strict and specific set of rules. No one knows exactly what it is or why it appears under the conditions that it does. However, I do know one thing for certain, and that is it has a higher chance of appearing in a library. If you ever decide to attempt this ritual, and I don't recommend that you do, be sure to properly follow the rules. Failing to do so will enrage the librarian, and you can be certain that the results will not be pleasant. In order to carry out the ritual, you will need 13 candles, a book which centers around some ideology which has led to the death of people. This could be the idea from a religion's holy book to anything else. It must, however, have been the cause for a killing or mass killing of historical significance. If it is not, then at the very least the ritual won't work. At the worst, the librarian will see it as an insult. A quill. It can be from any bird as long as it's a feather that you can write with. Drops of your own blood, enough to write with and to draw a circle. A small desk or table. A sharp knife, good enough to pierce through the book. Matches, and a handgun with 2 or more rounds of ammunition. If you choose to do the ritual with people, then they must individually see to their own requirements for themselves. Keep in mind that this ritual can be done in any space from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. It hasn't been recorded to have happened at any other time. If you choose to carry this out, then it's advised that you do it with a group of people for safety reasons. Carrying out the ritual. This will be done in a series of steps. Step 1. Find a spacious area with many exits so that you can escape easily if anything goes wrong during the proceedings of the ritual. Step 2. Place the candles in the center of the room and light each one with a 6-second delay after lighting the last one. Step 3. Position the desk or table in the center of the circle. Step 4. Place your book of choice on the desk or table. Step 5. Take the quill and draw a large circle with your blood on the first page of the book. Step 6. Write your name or names clearly within the circle of blood. Step 7. This is where you must ask boldly, "What is the most powerful weapon?" "Knowledge," will be heard echoing through the halls. depending on where you are. It's believed that this is the librarian's answer to your question. Step 8. Stab the book where you drew the circle. Ensure that your names are touched by the incision. You will not be able to see the librarian, but you will feel the cold pressure of its presence. You may see a shadow from the corner of your eye. There's no need to look, because if the librarian has appeared, it's already deemed you worthy. You'll only ever truly see the librarian if it wants to attack you. Once you feel the librarian's presence, extinguish all of the candles and burn all of the materials that you used, including the desk and the book, for they are now subject to a curse. As a result of completing the ritual, you will have an enhanced mental capacity beyond that of most. You'll be on par with the most blessed and sharpest minds. The catch is, by doing this ritual, you've signed a blood contract with the librarian. You will feel its presence wherever you go. On hot summer days, you will actually cast 2 shadows, and on long winter nights, it'll loom over you, unseen but present. Other people won't notice this, and you'll likely be driven insane by it. This will apply to all the participants of the ritual. Remember, you must never contact each other after performing it. Oh, and you must have guessed by now that that handgun is only to be used if something goes wrong. If the librarian decides to attack you, then by all means, don't hesitate to shoot it. If a single round has no effect on it, then the rest of the rounds are for you. For death is preferable to what it does to its victim. Ravens, of course, have long been believed to be ill omens. Carrion birds are not often looked upon kindly. As such, it's perhaps unsurprising that many cultures associate ravens with death and lost souls. They're also, however, sometimes considered very wise indeed, which when combined with their less than savory reputation may account for the raven man's dangerous nature. As always, play at your own risk. Players involved: 1 principal. Requirements: a quiet, dark room. It is recommended that this ritual be performed in a non-urban setting, as any light pollution may cause unintended and unfortunate results. Salt, 5 candles, matches or a lighter, a sharp object capable of drawing blood such as a needle or knife, a candle snuffer, this is optional, and a talisman or protective object personal to yourself. The summoning itself comes in several stages. First, begin at night, ideally on a cloudy, moonless one. Next, prepare the room. Draw the curtains, ensuring no light leaks in from the outside, and turn off all lamps or other light sources. Keep your object of protection with you at all times during the ritual. Draw a circle on the floor with the salt. Do not step inside the circle. Line up the 5 candles in front of you. Using the matches or the lighter, light the first 4 candles in sequence. While lighting them, recite the following incantation, lighting 1 candle per line. On this dark night, call on the Raven Man. Appear before me here and now, and do my will. Next, using the sharp object, pierce your finger until it bleeds. Touch your blood to the 5th candle and recite, "The flame is my beacon, the blood my sacrifice." Then light the 5th candle. After you light the 5th candle, the Raven Man will make his presence known, although he will be confined to the interior of the salt circle. You may be able to see him, however, it's more likely that he will remain unseen. You may now ask whatever you want of him. If you seek information, he will provide it for you. If you require an agent, he will complete any task you put him to. Treat him respectfully and do not overstep your bounds. What these bounds are is for you to find. The end of the ritual is, of course, the dismissal of the entity. It should be noted, however, that it contains several steps specifically for your protection. These are not to be ignored. Once you have asked all that you wish to, thank the Raven Man. Thank him for coming, thank him for answering, and thank him for granting your requests. Do not bypass this step. Put out the candles one by one. As you snuff them, speaking the following words, putting out one candle for each word in the sentence and one for his name. I release you now, Raven Man. Do not blow out the candles. Either use a candle snuffer or pinch them with your fingers. Clean up the salt, but do not dispose of it. Instead, place it outside any doors leading to your home. Keep your object of protection close by for the next several days. Do not go anywhere without it, for leaving it behind may invite the Raven Man to call upon you for service. And you don't want to do whatever it is he asks of you. Trust me. Do you have something that you truly, relentlessly desire? Despite your state of life, is there something else that you would go completely to the end of the world to get? Well, lucky for you, there's a way to achieve what you're looking for, and you won't need to go to the end of the world to get it. But you will need to go somewhere, and that place may be too out of reach for some. It's not far away, closer than one may believe, but there are requirements that some individuals may not meet. First, whatever it is that you seek, know that you must seriously desire what you want. In your eyes, it must be something you need. If you begin the journey without the correct state of mind, you will surely fail, as it will be near impossible to turn back once the journey starts. The second requirement is that you will need a vehicle of sorts. Most use a car, as it's the most comfortable choice. There may have been a select few that have used small motorized vehicles, such as an ATV or motorcycle, but this has proven to be quite difficult, as the conditions of the journey can prove to be too bothersome. Do not use a vehicle too large or conspicuous, as you will need some of the cover of night to be most safe. Also, while any sort of car will do, you may not want to choose the most expensive or cherished vehicle. You can take your slick new black Mercedes for the drive if you'd like, but don't expect it to come out in a pristine state. Make sure that your vehicle is completely fueled before the drive. The first task to accomplish is to locate the road. It doesn't have a name, it's not on the map, and technically, it doesn't even exist. It will only show up if you're looking for it at the right time, and you will only spot it if you know what to look for. Finally, you must be alone during the journey. You didn't think you'd be able to go with a group, did you? It must be night when you begin. Choose the time of night where you believe the roads are the least populated. Drive to any area that is just a stretch of road surrounded by woods. Here's where you want to start paying attention. If you're looking for the road, it will turn up eventually, but you need to search for the road's hint in order to pull down the right one. Once you're close, you will see or feel its signs, but what the signs will be depend on what it is you desire. For example, if you're in search of wealth, you may spot shimmers on empty branches of trees as they resemble the shine of gold or diamonds. If you seek love, you may begin to see rose petals slowly dance in the light breeze, blowing in the road's direction. If you seek revenge, you may sense an ever-growing feeling of heat or anger in your body as you approach. Just know what it is you really want, and you'll have no problem finding the turn. Once you're sure you've found the revealed road, take a deep breath, and then turn down onto it. At this point, you'll have officially started down the nameless road which brings you through 11 miles, leading to whatever it is you seek. Each mile will test your desire. and it'll expose if you really do want what you're searching for. Before you get any further, stop the car and be wary of a few advisements. Do not turn on a radio during the drive. Do not use a phone during the drive. Do not open the windows during the drive. Make sure they are closed. Before you continue, if you are riding in a vehicle without windows or a top, then prepare for the worst, as the odds are heavily stacked against you. Do not attempt to leave your vehicle at any time. You'll never want to exceed 30 miles per hour unless you're desperate to make it through the section of the road. And most importantly, as with any time you're driving, buckle up. Feel free to prepare and make sure you're ready. Once the road has been entered, time will stop, so you don't need to worry about losing the night. Though you may not notice, you're actually not in your own world anymore. Take one last moment to realize that once the first mile is over, there's no turning back. If you ponder turning back at all, know that you shouldn't even be on the journey in the first place. Once all is done, continue on the road. On the first mile, you won't see much change. The road passes through mostly woods, with a few miles being an exception. The air will turn a bit colder, in which you should turn on your heating system if the vehicle has one. You won't want to take your eyes off the road later. Take some time to calm any uneasiness by admiring some of the night sky. You'll see it completely lined with stars, more than what you would ever believe possible. If the weather was cloudy beforehand, you'll also notice the sky is now clear. On the second mile, the air will become even colder. This is primarily the reason why traveling in an open vehicle is very difficult. With each mile, the air will drop in temperature even if the season should be warm. If the air is too cold to bear, even with the heat on, your only option is to speed up. With each mile, the road also becomes more complex, taking more turns and showing an increasing amount of road hazard. Be sure to always keep focused on the road in front of you in order to avoid as many bumps or obstacles as possible. Hitting a few rocks and potholes won't hamper your progress too much, but you'll want to keep in the best condition for as long as possible. If your vehicle is forced to a stop because of damage, then there's nothing left that you can do but eventually freeze to death. On the third mile, you may begin to spot silhouettes of human figures in the linings of the trees. Pay no attention to them, even if they seem to get closer. It'll be hard to resist peeking at their unnerving, distant appearance, but know that they will reveal themselves later. At this mile, the road will become dirt if you weren't driving on it in the beginning. Keep to the center of the path, as it will become narrow and wide at random intervals. On a quick side note, should you ever attempt to turn around, despite the previous warnings, you'll be left on a path which never ends. You would simply run out of fuel eventually, and be left to freeze in the cold conditions. On the fourth mile, you'll not only see more of the figures, but you will begin, in a sense, to hear them. In the back of your mind, a very faint and unintelligible whisper will echo. These will come and go, but you can't stop them. If they become bothersome or distracting, try and tune them out by thinking of whatever it is you desire. Attempting to listen and determine what the voices are saying will only attract them to you, and you want to be as far away from them as you can. They'll be closer later, so there's no use bringing them near you this early. On the fifth mile, you'll come to a clearing. The lining of the trees to your left will disappear to reveal a lake with no end, with a beaming great moon over the water. The illumination from the moon will be so spectacular that the vehicle's headlights will no longer be required. Restrain yourself from gazing at it. If you look at its light for even more than a few seconds, the road in front of you will end, throwing your vehicle into the water, in which you'll freeze in mere minutes. The voices will be gone for this mile, but don't rejoice yet. They'll be back. On the sixth mile, Make sure to take into account that you're more than halfway done. Despite that progress, you may lose hope here. The stars will have disappeared at this point, leaving the sky an empty black abyss. The clearing will have ended, leading you back into the woods. The only light you'll have will be provided by your vehicle headlights, but they'll flicker from time to time, even if you're sure they're in perfect working order. If your vehicle has a radio, it will turn on here automatically. If you didn't turn it off beforehand, it will produce an overwhelming screech that will send you off the path. A calm voice will then begin to speak about your greatest fears, what it is you are horrified of in your life. It will speak in a way that will cause you to visualize these words in your mind, so don't listen to it. If you begin to comprehend what it's saying, the horrors will prove too much for you to stay on the road safely. Attempting to turn off the radio will prove no use. Speed up if you need to. Just keep your mind off the voice as much as you can. As you approach the end of the mile, the voice will fade out of the speakers, leaving your ears at peace. For now. On the 7th mile, the voices from the figures will return. It won't sound like a whisper this time, but more like distant screams, growing closer with each second. At some point on this mile, you'll hear one of them in your ear as if one of them were right behind you. This is because one of the figures has found their way into your vehicle. Don't turn around. Their faces will shock you into a paralysis, leading you off the road. If you don't draw attention to it, it will become uninterested, and hopefully leave. These beings are said to be the ones who have traveled down this road before, but were not successful. They live the remainder of their existence in suffering, in the darkness, with their only goal being to bring other travelers down with them. It has been said, from experience, that these beings can't physically harm you so long as they don't cause you to wreck. So you should be fine. On the 8th mile, slow down if you're going too fast. The road here takes very sharp turns, which if overshot, will throw the vehicle into a pit through the trees. The cold is near fatal here. If you were to have a glass or bottle of liquid in your vehicle, it would be solid in seconds. Your heating system will have become completely obsolete. Your headlights will flicker more, sometimes shutting off for a few seconds. You should brake if this happens, but don't completely stop. The figures will be following you at this point, and should you stop for too long, they will surround and trap your vehicle. More of their screams can be heard from outside your doors, sometimes even sounding of maniacal laughter. Their hands will claw at your windows, desperate to reach in and feel something living. Don't look at them. They won't block your windshield, and the last thing you want to happen is to crash and be trapped with them. If you don't make it from here, pray that it's the freezing that ends you. On the 9th mile, your vehicle will stall. The headlights will shut off, as will all the other systems inside. There's nothing you can do to prevent this. What you need to do is close your eyes and immediately attempt to restart the vehicle. Keep your eyes closed, as the figures would have surely surrounded you at this point. The starting of the vehicle will frighten them, and they'll back away temporarily. This will give you a chance to start moving forward again. If you hear the windows crack from their struggle, don't lose focus. The beings can alter the vehicle, but remember that they still do not have the strength to physically affect you. You will hear nothing but their voices rampaging in your mind, as there could be anywhere between a dozen or 100 of them after you now. Once you start the vehicle, floor it. Floor it so long as you can stay on the path. When the mile's done, the beings will retreat. On the 10th mile, the voices will begin to stop, one by one. If you were to look in your rearview mirror, don't actually do this. You will find them following you, but not as if they were chasing. They're watching you, as if they were seeing you off. As you go down the 10th mile, the road will be smoother, as if you were back on the 1st mile. The figures will be lining the sides of the path ahead of you. They won't be after you, but they'll watch you as you pass. Some have theorized that the beings are impressed here, that you've come a long way on the journey to what you desire. This is false. They're not impressed, but they are happy. They're happy that you're about to approach the next mile. They're happy because you're most likely going to your death. On the 11th and final mile, everything in your vehicle will lose power, as it did on the 9th mile. The vehicle would normally be immobile, but you'll still be moving. An unseen force will be pulling you forward. In the darkness, you will see a glowing red light up ahead, as if it were a light at the end of the tunnel. Close your eyes, cover them, do whatever it takes to make sure you do not see what you're about to go through. Covering your ears would also be helpful, but keeping your eyes covered should be a higher priority. The red light is in another clearing, but there's no moon or lake this time. Once it's entered, unrelenting and inconceivable noises will start from all directions. No amount of bravery or conditioning will spare you from these sounds. The cold will turn to a merciless heat, burning all the parts of the vehicle. You will feel the illusion of the flesh being burned off your bones, that every part of you is being destroyed as you travel through the screams and audible suffering. As long as you keep your eyes closed and resist the urge to see where you are, you'll survive through this. This will last a total of 31 seconds, but many fail to keep their vision closed during that time and are left to the worst fate of the road. Where is this mile located? Those who have survived don't know. Some have named it the transmission from hell, but whether it's actually a part of hell is debatable. After the final mile, your power will return. Stop the vehicle, take a moment to possibly regain some of your sanity, let the screaming in your ears begin to fade, and know that you have nearly completed your journey with the hardest task overcome. Take a breath and begin to drive forward once again. After only a kilometer, your vehicle will arrive at a dead end. Stop here and don't attempt to move again. Nothing will happen right this second, but don't be disappointed. Relax and close your eyes. Imagine in your mind what it is you've desired this entire time. It'll most likely still be the same as when you entered, but with some, this desire may actually change through making the journey. Think about what it is that you went through such terrifying and difficult means to acquire, and imagine possessing it in your hands. Once you've completely visualized this, slowly open your eyes. You'll then find yourself at the beginning of the unnamed road, where you first began. This may confuse you, but know that you are, in fact, finished. Your task is done. Your mind will then turn to your reward. If what you desired was material, check in your back seat or in the trunk if the object is larger. If the object was small enough, it might already be in your pocket. If your desire was non-material, then don't be too disappointed if the change is not immediate. When you go back to where you came from, you'll find in your life that what you wanted is there. You may have found the love of your dreams. You may have gained unnatural, unimaginable power. You may have put your most hated enemy to the most satisfying revenge possible. You will have no doubt gained what it is you deserve. So, now that the task is done, what's the catch? Is your vehicle cursed? Is there something you're about to lose? Is your death imminent? The answer to all of these, of course, is no. You've done the challenge. You've proved worthy of what it is you desire. As stated before, the sounds of the 11th mile will continue to exist in your mind, potentially causing you some vivid and unusual nightmares, but these should prove as nothing compared to what you've gained. Now, one last question. Is there something else you desire? Are you not yet satisfied? After all, you're left right back where you started. Road's right in front of you. So, are you up for another drive? If so, buckle up and just move forward.